All right. Woo. Hi everybody, my name's Sarah. Thank you for having me here and thank you for dialing in at home or work or wherever you might be. So I am a mental health nurse working up here in Auckland, as Scott just introduced me before. Not sure if everyone heard that. So I have been working as a mental health nurse for 3 years now, and because it's my interest and my passion, that's sort of what I want to talk about in relation to pandemics. I want to really focus on any fear and anxiety that people feel around this time. I want to focus on the long-lasting psychological effects that these can have. And also I want everybody to recognise that people have commitments outside of work as well. They have personal commitments to their families and things. So I just want to delve into those a little bit more, just to get you thinking perhaps about an aspect of project management that you might not have thought about before. So there is a high probability here in New Zealand that we are going to be faced with some sort of impact from COVID-19. I say that because we've seen it in other countries, very well-developed countries who probably thought they wouldn't have such an impact, have now been having mandatory quarantines, their schools have been shut down, their healthcare is overloaded. And yeah, from what I've been reading firsthand from health professionals overseas, they didn't see it coming. So I've also heard from experts internationally and in New Zealand that it is likely that in New Zealand we're going to be faced with a similar situation if we don't prepare. When I talk about fear and anxiety, you've already seen some of this. The very first confirmed case that we had in New Zealand, we had people going out that same night or the day after, and the supermarkets were just overrun, the shelves were cleared, doomsday shoppers, everybody just jumped into a huge reaction of thinking they were going to be self-isolated. So that sort of reaction, really quite quick and extreme, is calmed down now, but I won't be surprised if once we see COVID-19 start to be community spread, that potentially this could all hype up again. You may have people again reacting, potentially not going into work by choice because they don't want to be exposed. That could be because they don't want to get sick themselves. They could have family members at home, potentially elderly parents or immunocompromised family members that they don't want to bring the illness back to them. Could also be the case that they have to either stay home with their kids because their kids are sick, or maybe that we actually close schools down here in New Zealand to stop the spread, and so parents are then actually forced into having to stay at home for childcare because they have no other option. So those sorts of looking at people staying home rather than going into work, it's good to think about. Are you still going to be able to offer work to people? Can you set up work can they work from home? Do you still have good communication with them? Do you have all the right contact numbers? Such and such. The other point to think about there as well is potentially if one of your key workers does have to go off work, do you have somebody else who could step into their place? Do you have alternative people, or is now the time to start thinking about training up somebody, getting some other people who could take over some of that load if one of your main key people needs to be off work for any certain or extended period of time potentially. The other side of the fear and anxiety is, we've actually seen it internationally as well. People get very defensive about their families, which is absolutely 100% fine. That's our personal connection. That's what we're designed to do, to look after our families. But we have seen some quite negative reactions towards other people. Potentially, if that person, you might have already felt it if you're just coughing and you're getting some really bad vibes from people, or people are staying away from you. There is the thought that potentially in the workplace that could be really negatively viewed if somebody does come into work and they're a little bit sick. How are their colleagues going to react to that? And how is the team going to stay cohesive? I also want to mention about, give me one moment, because it was very important. Oh, I think we're going to pause, are we, for that? Like, yeah, okay. I was one granola. Thanks. Completely lost my train of thought for that. Hopefully it comes back to me later. So what I might just do now is I've pre-prepared just putting the fear and anxiety side of it into a bit of a PRINCE2.
The other one, is it for you, Scott? Is that preference? Oh, preference, yeah.
Putting it all into a PRINCE2 context. So to do that, we're just going to look at a couple of the principles of PRINCE2 and how they relate to staff and communities, whether they're actually infected with COVID-19 or if it's just in relation to the response that communities, governments, people have to the illness and the potential for infection. So, continued business justification. We will need to look at whether your project continues to be desirable in the current climate, weighing up the costs, benefit, risks. Is it viable and still achievable? And you may have to prioritise your project within the wider economic and organisation context. Potentially, your project, if things do continue to escalate in New Zealand, will your project still be a priority for your organisation? Learn from experience. So we've had already a lot of, like I said before, we've had a lot of international countries who are very well developed. They have been hit quite severely by this COVID-19. So it's good to look at the international responses that we've seen, and also if there are any projects going on internationally that you could relate to your own project, see how they've managed with it, so you're not having to start from scratch. Just to get a bit of some clues on there. Define roles and responsibilities. So you need to identify the risks there, potentially, obviously, as you do, and who is responsible for those risks. Also, as I mentioned before, to potentially have some backup people or train some more people if one of your key staff members does have to step out for whatever reason. Managed by stages I find quite interesting because there is going to be an ongoing impact both economically and also psychologically from this COVID-19. Potentially that will be years into the future. There is currently and maybe ongoing a disruption to supply chains. So thinking about whether you're going to be able to access the supply that you need for your future stages as well, not just your current one. And yeah, the overall economic impact. Again, how's that going to affect your future stages? Do you need to readjust now? The big thing I think is the fear of the unknown. People don't react well to the unknown. The more you can have an impact now, have a real think about the different risks that may be involved, like I mentioned about the families. People need to look after their families, they have an obligation to do that. They may well and potentially should prioritise their families over their work, but in saying that they still have that financial obligation that they need to continue to bring in money. So how can you balance that so that people can continue to do their work whilst also keeping their family safe, whilst also keeping their head in the game, that they're not distracted by any concerns about their family, about their own health. And it really helps people to feel secure, which, I mean, in a situation like this, in uncertainty, people feel like they feel vulnerable, they feel like they've lost their security. And so knowing that their project manager or that their higher up actually has their best interest in heart and is thinking about their welfare, their family's welfare, it helps to just bring that anxiety level down. The good communication is so key in that. So talk to your staff, your workers, however you phrase their clients, whatever. Talk to them. Keep that communication going. Make sure everyone's on the same page. Everyone feels comfortable with the plan that you have in place. You may well have them come up with great ideas that you hadn't thought of. Whatever, two heads are better than one, as that old saying goes. And so really I just want you to keep focusing on not only your project and the products and that you're creating from this time, but also really focus on understanding your workers' fear and anxiety that they're going through at this time. Think about the longer term psychological impact that this COVID-19 can have, and also just remember that people do have commitments outside of their workplace. Okay, thank you. I'll hand you back over both mics.
Okay, yeah. Awesome. Okay, so I've just got a message back from Jarrod Spence over in Seattle. He's on a call out, but he's just on his way back to the station. So the moment he's back, I think he drives one of the fire engines. So the moment he's back, he'll be able to give us a bit of a rundown. So I think at this point, I'm going to go on to Alistair. And like I said, Alistair is with the Auckland City Council as an investment advisor. So I'm just going to pass over to him. There you go. Alistair, you want to put those two on your... You're not quite sure which one's the most... Put that somewhere on your body and I'll attach this. It'll be like stereo.
Yeah.
How's that?
Yeah. Good morning. How does that sound? Is that okay? Okay. So good morning. I'm Alistair Falkner. I am an investment advisor and actually in the budgeting area of Auckland Council. This is just a very quick subjective view from an individual working in a very large organisation, 6,500 or will be by the end of 2020 staff, and how we coped with an incident where we evacuated our 29-storey building of all its staff. What started off as a pretty minor thing turned into a major thing. So just to go back, just a quick story of opposite our building, Sky Convention Tower, building it, someone left a burner on, set fire to their roof, a half-finished building. Mayor notices at about 1 p.m. there's a fire there. By 3 p.m. we're starting to smell something coming through our air conditioning vents. And by 3:30 people say, look, I think you might as well go home early tonight, this is not great. By 4:30 we get a message on our phone saying, look, you should just work at home tomorrow. 6 days later, on the following, so that was on a Tuesday, the following Monday we were allowed back in the building. So how do you cope with that number of people, not 6,500, I'm not sure how many are in the tower, but a fair number not being able to work in their main offices? Well, one thing that the council has is it's very strong on remote working. We're very strong at supporting people. So everybody has laptops and phones and the ability to work home and the connectivity, and it's not just your own files, it's back into the file servers and allowing all of that. And that really helped. Having said that, I went home happily without my laptop, and a fair number of people too. So getting back and had to be escorted in to get your laptop. I thought I could do it for one day with just on a phone. You quickly find that isn't the case. You really need all your stuff. And it's interesting right now what people are saying is just make sure that you've got things like power cables, because if you're going to be at home, people take their laptops home, but do they take their power cables? Quite often they don't. So that kind of really understanding what it is you need to function, and some of the things people are saying, well, should I also have a large screen at home? Because if I'm going to be there, it's one thing to spend a day looking at a small 13-inch screen. It's a whole other thing to be doing that for 2 full weeks. So potentially you need a bigger screen. The other sorts of things that we have support for, which might not be, is Skype for Business, and which sounds, yeah, that's easy, lots of people install it, but how often do you use it? How comfortable are you using it? And some of the other things is actually communicating with your team. It's pretty important that you're comfortable and you do it regularly. There's another aspect of things we talk about is lone workers. So we're big supporters of remote working and allowing people to be flexible. That's not even said in your contract. It's just assume we can all work at home when we need to, and it works both for us and for the customers. Part of that is we've got staff, quite a few staff who are just at home on their own. What are some of the rules and things about, getting up and stretching every 20 minutes because you're just there? So some of those aspects are important too. But coming back to what this sort of in the lessons learned is, it's about preparation, making sure you know what you should have there. But ultimately, you're still going to be surprised by it, like I was. Oh, yeah, that's fine. The fire will be out in the morning, and no, it wasn't. That's not going to stop. We'll always be surprised by something new. But you do as much planning as you can. Think about, our team's planning, our executive leadership team at Auckland Council's planning, and there are special groups also planning. So just thinking about it, it's not rocket science, but just you go through these things, and it makes a world of difference to when and if anything major happens. I don't know if I've got a lot more to say, but if anyone's got any questions, happy to answer anything. Scott, sorry, I was a little bit quick, but...
Okay, no worries at all. I don't have any questions yet from the group, so I'll invite them to ask me questions. If anybody wants to ask questions to Alistair or Sarah, I know Sarah Lowry's got a question for Sarah actually. So Sarah, the two Sarahs are going to have a conversation. But if you've got any questions for Alistair, feel free to put them through the chat facility. There's about a minute delay, so once you've finished talking, a minute later, ask questions like that. So,
Yep.
In the meantime, Sarah Lowry has a question related to mental health and fear of loss of income. What about those who work on contracts, practical jobs, tradies, and micro-roles, not being able to work from home? So do you want to grab the
Hold them.
Yeah. So Sarah Lowry asked a question you might have seen in the chat facility. Do you guys get that question when I read it out? Yeah, about the tradies and what's going to happen with them. So I just thought you might be able to talk about that if you've had any ideas.
Yeah, well, I suppose this way, okay. I suppose what comes to mind there is that typically people can hold themselves together, psychologically speaking, people can hold themselves together for a decent amount of time. So yes, absolutely, people will be completely anxious about that. As I said before, it's one of our main duties is to look after our families and provide for them. I would expect that we would probably see that aspect of it as coming in further down the line. So in a few months, say, I work in an inpatient unit actually, and I imagine that our mental health services will start to see the longer lasting effects of that coming in a few months down the track, possibly more for people who haven't been able to get their work back in for whatever reason, or if things have changed for them in the meantime, whatever with your mortgages and everything that's going on, it really does have a longer lasting effect. I suppose.
Cool. I wondered too, actually. I'm wondering when it comes to the loss of income, there's a lot of government. I live in Australia, in Brisbane, and I know there's talk about stimulus packages and being able to provide some sort of funding for those people, as well as things like relief on debt and those sorts of things. So I think similar to what happened in the US when the government shut down and there was a relief of debt for people who had mortgages, etc., for government employees, I think that sort of government response is probably likely to be coming out. I think most governments are being kept, they just don't know what the heck's going on, and so they're just like, oh my gosh, how are we going to respond to all these things? And the legislation has to go through, laws have to be checked out to see whether it's going to be legally challenged and those sorts of things. But I reckon that we can expect to see some sort of income relief, maybe an easier way to get onto some sort of government programs hopefully. But yeah, that doesn't take away the stress, I guess, and the fear associated with it. So, now I'm just going to check in to see whether Jarrod is available now. Hopefully he's come back. So just give me a second to do that.
Have some waiting room music going.
Yeah, exactly.
It's such a big thing to think about overall, because there's direct service workers, there's all sorts of different...
So Jarrod's ready now. I'm actually going to use another microphone for that, but let's see if we can get him on the speakerphone. Hey Jarrod, are you there?
Yes.
Yep.
Great. Okay, cool. Look, I'm just going to put you on the speaker. I've got you on speakerphone. I'm going to put you over by the other microphone. Hopefully, we'll get a good quality connection. Just a moment. So I'm just gonna. We've got about a minute delay on the YouTube connection. Jarrod, are you still there?
Yep.
Cool. Okay. So I'm just going to ask people what the audio's like, just to see if we're getting a good audio connection.
I think it's a fair response, what Sarah was saying. It's a fair response to going, something's coming and we're worried, and so this is what we need to stock up for foreseeable future. I think here it's still okay, but just
Okay. I'll just try and move everyone.
buying toilet paper is a sense of control, because it's not like you've got the control of being able to do something to alleviate some of that unsettled feeling that you
Down here.
have. Yeah, and it's very picky one item. Not that I was out buying toilet paper, but I can understand why people are worried and that's their response.
Okay, so Jarrod, do you mind just talking now? Let's just see how the audio goes there.
Sure.
Just introduce yourself for a moment.
My name's Jarrod Spence. I'm a deputy chief up here in Washington State at a fire department, and also work as a firefighter for another fire department as well.
Great. Okay. Cool. That audio looks like it's going pretty well actually. So I think people are saying there's scraping of cutlery, but other than that, hopefully it's going to be a good audio, and they'll be able to hear you. It's always tricky when you're connecting to people on the other side of the world. Look, I just wondered if you could give us a current update on the current situation where you are in Seattle.
Okay, yeah, so we got a situation report this morning, so I'll just run through it. I haven't had a whole lot of time to go through it. We've been running a couple of calls this morning. We're looking currently at 29 deaths, and we have 366 cases here in Washington State. That was updated on the 10th. And so looking at this, with nursing homes, we have 55 positive cases in nursing homes. We have 34 hospitalized from nursing homes, and we have 21 that are remaining in the nursing homes at this point. With the FEMA Region 10, currently we're at activation level 1 with 267 confirmed cases for Washington State. Oregon is at level 1 with 2 confirmed, 17 presumptive positives, and 62 under investigation with pending results. We have 220 under current monitoring in Oregon.
Okay. And have you been recently out on any calls with regards to the coronavirus? I mean, over here in New Zealand, while the coronavirus, people are being isolated, and I think we've got just a few cases. I believe it's like below 10, so 5 people. I mean, it's likely to be circulating within the community already, and we're just maybe not aware of it. Do you find that there are outbreaks currently that you're being affected by which are not related to travelling passengers?
Yeah, that's correct. We are finding that we have been exposed. We just had 3 members that were quarantined from our fire department just, I believe, yesterday, and that was basically from an assist up. So, it was a patient that had no known contact with any other people that were confirmed with COVID-19. It was an assist up where the patient was thought to have possibly UTI, was transported to the hospital, and several weeks later we find out that the patient has, or actually I don't think it was several weeks, I believe it was a week later, found out the patient had COVID-19, and so now we've quarantined these 3 members of our fire department earlier this week. So I was on a patient not long ago, unknown if it was a confirmed COVID-19, but we are taking precautions where we do a door assessment of the patient, whereas we don't come into physical contact with the patient. We find out what their symptoms are. If they don't have a fever, but they're coughing, we advise them to stay home. If they do have a fever, we ask them to monitor that, and then if they get to the point where they're having respiratory issues, then they can call 911 back, and we can go from there in regards to transport. At this stage, we're recommending that people stay at home, and then if anything develops further, either have a family member take them to the hospital after contacting the hospital before transporting, or we can transport them too if their respiratory is at the point where they need life support.
And I guess it sounds like your responses now to even the most sort of like every occasion you've got to think of, is there a COVID case where you're being called out, and maybe changing the way you respond to those. Is that a change in methodology as to how you guys are working?
Yeah, there's a big change. We're our personal protective equipment that we're using right now has been upgraded to the point where we wear a mask for every single patient. It doesn't matter whether they have the flu, whether they have a cold, whether they have a broken toe, or they're having heart problems. We're wearing masks to every single patient. Right now, also, our dispatch agency has entered Protocol 36. This means that all patients will be evaluated by our dispatching agency, and they may get to the point where they may not even dispatch us and just advise the patient to stay at home and quarantine themselves until at which point their respiratory becomes an issue. Then they will either call us back or they will self-transport to the hospital.
Okay. And with regards to the challenges that you're facing, you mentioned that you're being inundated with information at the moment when I spoke to you yesterday. Can you just give us a bit of information about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot of information and it's always changing. Trying to figure out, it's difficult to get ahead of everything. But the issues that we're facing is being able to access personal protective equipment for the providers. Obviously, if providers start going down, then that's going to cause even more issues with the patients and being able to treat those. We're having issues with getting masks, getting goggles, getting glasses, getting gowns, all that sort of thing. And so we're starting to take from the federal stockpile. And so we have several incident management teams that are set up within the state at this stage, which may expand as time goes on, but they are ordering directly from the federal stockpile, and then they are disseminating all those supplies out to the fire agencies as we need them.
So what happens when you run out?
Yeah, the question is, what happens when you run out?
Well, we're taking it day by day. The goal is that we don't run out. At this stage, we have more than enough supplies that are going to last us for several months. But we will start. We're wearing masks when we're coming into contact with the patient, even at a six foot point. We'll be wearing masks, and the goal is to get a mask on the patient. The N95s obviously are in short supply, and so we're opting for surgical masks to be put on the patients, and the provider's going to be wearing the N95s. For the most part, in all ambulances that are going to be transporting the patients, we are cordoning off the front area for the drivers, so that even though they'll be wearing a mask as well, we're trying to minimize exposure as much as possible. So depending on how many people respond to the call, we're going to try to decrease the people that are using the mask. If we have one person in the back, one person in the front, that's going to be 2 masks. And so we're trying to minimize that as much as possible. Often we would have multiple people there, multiple people wearing masks, so we're trying to decrease that as much as we can.
Okay, and is there anything that you're noticing? Like Sarah was talking earlier about the psychological effects and the fear effects. Do you have any comments and any observations that you've seen through your interactions with people about the fear? I mean, is it verging on paranoia in some cases, or are people being fairly they feel informed, so they're not being too worried when you interact with them?
Well, the issue that we run into is that we do have that fear aspect, and there's a lot of patients that when they call us, we go out to their home, their blood pressure is up, and they're concerned about COVID-19. And then when we get there, they don't want to go to the hospital, obviously, because there are COVID-19 patients at the hospital, and so there's that fear of going to the hospital. But yet they're calling us as well, and so it's taking a lot of the resources from being available for other calls. And we're trying to talk these patients down and say, hey, look, there's not much we can do about it, okay? It's a flu. Unless you have some of these pre-existing conditions, it's not going to be an issue. And so a lot of it is trying to reduce that anxiety that a lot of people seem to have. And then you have the other side where people aren't really worried and they're still going out and they're coughing. We were at the grocery store the other day. We had people coughing, walking around. And so there's those 2 extremes. And then those, again, is the middle ground where people are self-quarantining and they're not too worried about it, and they're aware. The first patient that we had as Washington State was ground zero. The patient knew that he had COVID-19, and he made sure that everybody was aware that responded to the call. We transported and there was no exposure in that instance, but there's people that know what's going on and take that into account and make sure that they don't expose others, and then there's those others that are extremes.
Yeah, and there just seems to be an escalation at the moment. I mean, as you'd be well aware, travelling back from Europe now is definitely a big no-no, so...
Yeah, and all our doctors and everybody are expecting this to get a lot worse before it gets better. We're having all school districts closed at the moment. There's some schools that are closed for 6 weeks, some closed for 2 weeks. As you can see, the NHL has cancelled all their games. The NBA has cancelled all their games, and that's we're also starting to see now with the new announcement from our governor, I believe yesterday, is that all concerts now are going to be cancelled. So it's getting worse before it gets better. They're trying to prevent the contact from people, because people aren't, a lot of the times people aren't showing many symptoms, or they're ignorant of the symptoms, where they go out and they mix with people, and that causes the spread.
We've got a question from Sarah Lowry, just saying it sounds like firefighters act as paramedics. Is that the case in the US as compared to New Zealand?
Yeah, so in the States is a little bit different. On the East Coast, they have more separate EMS and fire. On the West Coast, we have integrated fire and EMS. And so depending on what gets called first, we'll either take the ambulance or we'll take the fire engine. We also have private ambulance too, and so some fire departments will contract with private ambulance and they'll transport their patients. So it just depends on the setup, but most fire departments are integrated fire and EMS. EMS is where most of the money comes from through insurance and that kind of thing. Fire, there's not as much fire calls, but we also pay a tax as well for fire service and ambulance service.
Cool. Okay, well, I think we appreciate you taking the time. I know you were in between call-outs, so we're quite fortunate to have got you. I hope you're sort of almost in the middle of your day, so hopefully the rest of your day is going to be a bit calmer, right?
Yeah. Hopefully we're looking pretty good, and things start to cool off for us. A lot of people are going to be told to stay home and just monitor themselves, so that'll probably reduce a lot of our calls.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, thanks very much. Cheers, Joe.
Thank you. Bye.
Cheers, bye. Okay, guys, so thanks very much for joining us. We're going to have some breakfast here.